Welcome, everyone, prospective Legionaries in the Legions of New Rome. We have an excellent video for you here today. The meeting of great minds, architects of a great future. I'm joined by General Lance from Lance's Legion, who you are all familiar with. He's done a few videos on this channel before. And I'm joined by a new friend of ours, an esteemed Imperator, the Ark. Welcome.
Hello, Salwe.
So, most of you are pretty familiar with Lance already. You know, he's done a little introduction on the channel. So I just want to give the Ark a chance to introduce himself, introduce his mission, introduce the journey which brought him to this humble earth to revive the heroic ideal.
Yes, well, as I was saying earlier, I'm from a distant planet where the Roman Empire still exists, and I've been sent to this earth to restore the heroic ideal. No, but I have a humble YouTube channel called The Ark, and there I discuss the heroic ideal, the ancient Greeks, the Vikings, all that good stuff, as well as Nietzsche. And I'd say the project of the channel essentially is focused on the heroic ideal and the revival of the kind of classical pagan heroic ethos.
Excellent. And, you know, that really goes into, I think, Lance and I's mission as well. It's to revive this warrior spirit, to revive this military ethos, which is rooted in the heroic ideal. I do have a question, though. Back on this planet, are there any, like, cool figures, since Rome still exists, are there any cool figures out there that we should be aware of?
Yes, well, Caesar is there, and he is immortal, and he rules over us, and he's not bald anymore. He's gotten a haircut after drinking from the elixir of life. Um,
Well, tell him he still owes me for that whole Bithynia thing, okay?
That's good to hear, because I need to know that he's out there somewhere. And then once we've done our part on this earth and we've revived the heroic ideal and revived the warrior spirit, then we can return to the soil and return to, you know, the wind and be with our glorious leader once more. But anyway, I guess we all came here today because we do have this mission and this vision and this drive to return a military ethos, a heroic ideal, and that's sort of the project of New Rome, which we are slowly beginning to introduce to the prospective legionaries. We're slowly starting to send out whispers in the wind of this monumental movement towards something greater, and we are all here gathered today because we, you know, these architects of the future all have some sort of contribution to provide to this idea of New Rome, and not just the idea, but an actual physical manifestation of it. So, right off the bat, I guess let's sort of discuss the foundations and the framework of what we're trying to do without getting too specific, because like I said in my last interview with Lance, once this starts, it's going to be a raging fire that engulfs the universe. So we're just giving you the little tidbits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ark, I think for first of all, being a longtime fan of your work and especially absolute top aesthete in our sphere here, and I'm surprised. You know, you should be like 100,000 followers thus far, but you know, such is the whim and fate of life, right? But in the future, we'll command legions, so don't worry. But in any case, I was just considering, you know, a lot of the issue that surrounds our current time has to do with, you know, meeting people in real space and not just being meeting by proxy through the internet or through mediums and actually talking, hanging out with people. And I think one of the earliest, I guess, most impactful experiences I ever had was doing jujitsu at the age of 5. And it's there, especially in jujitsu, there's like this ethic that, you know, it's more about, you know, your will to win as opposed to necessarily being bigger or stronger than the opponent. And of course, these things have bearing, but the main crux of, I feel like, is our principle or spiritual principle is the agonal spirit, the agonal principle, which is to say, you know, what's right or wrong is he who wins, and he who loses is wrong. Does that make sense? And I wanted to get your perspective on that, Ark, and see what you feel about that.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think on the one hand, it's definitely an interesting frame to go kind of full Nietzschean and assert that truth is power and victory is truth, right? Those who win are in the right. But at the same time, I think that that's a kind of simplistic representation of what Nietzsche was writing about and kind of what we stand for.
Mm-hmm.
And the example I always use is people sometimes comment on my channel, well, there's an elite now, aren't the Bezoses and the Mark Zuckerbergs, aren't they the Ubermensch of the modern world? But, there's something deeper to the might makes right ethos. And that deeper thing, I think, like you say, is the will to win and the will to life, the will to beauty, the will to power, the will to strength. And that is what's lacking in our current elite. Although Zuckerberg, I've seen him doing something recently, so I'm not so sure he might be the Ubermensch of the future after all. But
he might start competing in MMA or UFC under the pseudonym of the Lizard Man.
Yes, that would be pretty sick. I'm not gonna lie. But even you see with Nietzsche, he was very sickly. Caesar had his own health issues, epilepsy, it seems, perhaps. And so, I'd say on the one hand, victory is truth in a certain sense, and you must understand that to operate in the world. But on the other hand, the deeper truth is the will to power and the will to victory itself.
Absolutely. And if I could just add a couple things to that, I think what's missing in today's elite, so if someone comes up to you and they're like, well, we have an elite today, right? Ultimately, there is a great subversion of what makes a people an elite in this modern age, I think. And because you see the primacy of the merchant class over the warrior class, more so over the past maybe 200-300 years, it's ultimately a subversion of will to power. The merchant's will to power does not engage with elemental forces. It does not engage with war and battle. It engages with the manipulation of things that represent value. So money, for example. If you think about crypto bros today, and I'd love to be rich off of crypto. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to make a meme coin that makes $10 million. But you have to ask yourself, what is somebody that's like a stock trader or a crypto bro actually contributing in terms of value? They're simply learning how to manipulate value. Same with the merchant. You are purchasing things at as low a price as you can and then reselling it at as high a price as you can. It's a subversion of value and a manipulation of value. So when we look at the elite today, I think one of the reasons that we have this sort of disdain for them is that we don't feel that they are representing a true manifestation of power. And of course, it's like, who's to say what that true manifestation is? But I think all of us can certainly see that the heroic ideal, the military ethos, there's something more authentic and raw that is possessed within that is lacking in an economic elite that really, after the first generation, like Jeff Bezos, his kids don't have any incentive to be great. They will inherit that money. I don't know if he has kids. I know he got divorced, so maybe he doesn't have kids. But any of these guys, right? Like Bill Gates, I think, has a daughter. They don't really have an incentive to be as great as their parents, the way the warrior does. If your father was this great warrior king, whether it be in medieval Europe or beforehand, if you did not live up to at least close to your father's expectations, you'd be conquered. You would be defeated by somebody stronger than you. There was a reason why the system, so to speak, worked. And it worked because war was the great mediator of decadence. If you grew too decadent, you would fall in battle. And this element does not exist today in the sort of economic classes that run society. And I don't want to go on too long, so I guess, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Do you mind if I take this one real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
So two thoughts come to mind, right? And I think this is the delineating factor, especially in philosophy. We talk about, how do we perceive the world, right? And I think the main delineating factor between us and, for instance, Platonism or the post-Socratics is we're a becoming, not a being, right? So the emphasis is, it sounds like, when I say that, it sounds like it's splitting hairs, but it's not, right? Because a becoming is a constant thing, a living thing, an expanding thing, or a dying thing. There's an arc, right? There is
No
a
pun intended.
changeability. Yeah, not exactly. There isn't this immutable factor of life. Everything is coming, everything is going, right? What goes comes again. What comes goes again. And what does this mean? All right, well, let's look at our life. This is the second point that I'm trying to make. Our little lifespan, whether you live 20 years or like even 120 years, there's some people that live to 113 years somehow, right? I can't imagine a worse fate. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that from our perspective in life, it seems as though especially because of the titanic forces at work, especially politically, but culturally speaking, the environment, whatever. But over a long enough timeline, things change. We are in constant motion. Just that our lifetime is so short that change is so incremental that it's imperceptible. And what I'm trying to extrapolate and finish this analysis is saying that this bourgeois elite isn't an elite. What they are doing are parasites, is basically parasiting off of a carcass. This carcass is dying. They're not really rulers. So for instance, the ARC gets that comment, for instance, isn't Mark Zuckerberg the Ubermensch of our time? I would disagree, because at the end of the day, Ubermensch are not present in every time. Also, the decadence of our time only gives rise to a crust of people who are fundamentally yeast. And just because they're able to put, wealth together doesn't mean that they're superior. It doesn't, and additionally, just because they have superior intellect also doesn't mean that they're superior. And obviously, I understand the implication where I kind of negate the contradiction when I say that the body is the measure of all things. So the mind as well as the physical, muscle or physicality of a person. But what I'm trying to say is that at base, it's also a matter of temperament. It's a matter of spirit. It's a matter of taste. Life is an aesthetic value, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm trying to say is that ultimately, just because here and now it seems as though these concepts don't exist, over a long enough timeline, they do. To think of it, Napoleon was only a blink of an eye or a flicker of a candle, in the course of history. Just because we don't live in a time where there are great men doesn't mean that they're permanently dead. It just means that we are like moles with very myopic vision over what the arc of life really is, and that is exceptionally long, if not infinite. Time is a flat circle. Thank you very much.
All right, ending it there. Yes,
no,
yes.
but I guess I just wanted to ask you, Art, don't you think that's like the delineating factor between us and them is that it's not about being, it's about becoming, and just because you're king of the hill now doesn't mean there's not someone trying to get you. You know what I mean? I guess that's how I see it.
Yes, definitely. And I like what you said about taste, because to go back, I guess, to Nietzsche, he's proposing this very interesting thing, which is if you don't look at history as progressive, as progressing towards something, especially towards any type of utopia or moral progress, then how do you judge ages? And the conclusion he draws, and I think the conclusion you would have to draw, is you have to judge ages by their quality, then the quality of the people they produce, and also the culture they produce, the art they produce. And then you're kind of looking at history almost zoologically, right? Like you would look at an evolutionary history of life. You might look at a certain age and say, wow, look at all the fantastic creatures that were produced during this age. Isn't it a shame that they're extinct? And ultimately on the evolutionary line, maybe they didn't progress towards anything, but they created uh, nature, I guess you could say, created during that age fantastic creatures, which were kind of an end in themselves. And so I think when people say, well, aren't the elite today Ubermensch, or isn't Nietzsche just saying that whoever wins is the Ubermensch, right? And I think what they're missing is that judgment upon the quality of an organism or of a culture, because ultimately the will to power is a kind of biological drive, right? It's the will to life, and so you can kind of perceive it viscerally, right? The will to power is not just holding a position of power; it's a will and a being, and you can sense when that's lacking in a culture, right? You can sense it
Yes.
in kind of the Buddhist hippie liberal kind of ethos, like, yeah, we should just be nice to everyone and go vegan and do as little harm as possible. You can just instinctually tell that the will to life and power is lacking there,
Mm-hmm.
because you understand on a instinctual level that life is competition, life is the will to power, and healthy organisms pursue power and life, and that's expressed in certain ways, through physical beauty, through the beauty of action. So yeah, if you look to history, assessing quality and looking for the will to power in that way, then Zuckerberg, despite his MMA, doesn't quite live up to the standards of Achilles.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I wanted to add something to that. Because we're talking about the constant state of becoming, and like, okay, well, how do you judge a historical epoch? I think ultimately what distinguishes the true distinction of the political spectrum, beyond the French Revolution, beyond economics, beyond all this shit. I think what really, the real distinction you can make is kind of almost the distinction between Nietzsche and Hegel. Hegel believing in a sort of historical progress, like you're talking about. That's sort of the neo-Marxist, the leftist, from Marx to Zizek today. I mean, they're essentially Hegelists. They believe that there is this progress of morality, and when you do that, you can use it to subdue aspects of the past that threaten a specific sort of regime that rules on subversion, rules by institution. I think, and I'm not saying, I don't know enough about Hegel to say this is the right interpretation of Hegel. Who the fuck knows what he says? But what I'm trying to get at is, because they've, the neo-Marxists use this Hegelian view of the progress of history, it discounts aspects of the past that are superior to the present. And what this does is, this gives us the idea that modern man should be domesticated, pacified, and castrated. And it is exactly what is happening today, from the time you're a child, in America at least. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but you're not allowed to fight, you're not allowed to roughhouse, you're not allowed to play tag even, because they're afraid someone's going to slip and fall and the parents are going to sue the school. It's so lame. Like, you're domesticating man. You're taking all that vital energy, that almost depression. It's like, it's a good kind of depression where it's like, I'm not satisfied with this. I'm going to embark on fulfilling my Faustian ambitions to go to distant lands and conquer them, whatever. It's hard to do that when you're well-fed, you're comfortable, and everybody's like, oh, no. What you need is these manners. What you need is this rule of law that's going to make you complete. We're progressing towards something perfect, a perfect utopia. And that's just not the case. That's not what invokes a real sort of affirmation of life. It is life denial in a lot of ways. And I guess what I'm getting at is, that's the distinction, is becoming versus just I have became. I have finished this progress. It's like I was telling Lance the other day, it's like in Fight Club where he talks about, I'm going to create the perfect home, the perfect IKEA nest, right? No one's ever going to be complete. And that is the difference between us, is like, we seek perfection knowing we will never attain it. The left, a lot of times today, they want to be fat and lazy or super skinny or super dysgenic because they want a final end state. They can't stand the fact that you're constantly going to be pain. You're in pain. We are fire. We are living fire. I've said this before. We are living fire, and we are constantly burning. And of course, we may be extinguished with death, but there's never like there's never like a completeness to that. We're never going to be complete, and they want to be complete. So if their completeness is mediocrity and a dysgenic sort of end state of ugliness and being fat and lazy, then they will take that, because what they seek most of all is comfort and a final solution. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's what they want, is just to be able to drop pack. I mean, they're just fundamentally tired souls. That's what they are. But I think it was Schopenhauer that said this. But basically, it's the how do you say, the universe is breathe in, breathe out, both affirmation and negation of the will, which is to say, the orgasm and the nirvana, right? And yes, so life is basically one big gooning session. No, no, no. What? No, what I mean to say is, basically, like, I think you could tell someone is physically sick or spiritually sick or whatever you want to call it, when you're able to understand that they want to stop, like, the cycle. And this is a very Buddhistic thing, which is why it's very life denying, especially like low vehicle Buddhism. But effectively, what the issue is with that kind of person is that they just want to drop pack and they want to arrive at a point in time where there is just simply suffice. They're sufficient. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes a special type of person to not do one or the other. So they want to be sufficient. Conservatives feel like they're being decayed, so they're doing the opposite, the inverse. So it's also wrong. But the truth is that it's a cycle of going back and forth and affirming that cycle of affirmation and negation, and constantly being willing to go and step back into the boxing ring of life. It's like Rocky. It's about how many rounds you can do. It's not necessarily about winning the fight. The win or the loss is really not the objective. And I think that's something that that Hinduism really talks about, especially when it comes down to their ethic of life being correct conduct, vice, I don't know what you'd call it, but I guess correct intention or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anyway, I'll leave it there. I don't want to rant too long.
I'll pass the mic off to the Ark.
Yes. And yeah, again, I think it comes down to, how you judge life. And if you really remove that idea that there can be a kind of progress and a perfect end, then you have to judge things by their quality, right? By their height, by their greatness. I think what's interesting, though, is thinking of Nietzsche in a certain sense as progressive, but just progressing towards something else. Mm-hmm. Because in his idea of the Übermensch, you do have a certain idea of progress or overcoming. And the idea there, of course, is not that you're progressing towards any utopia or towards the taming of man or any type of final moral state, but that throughout history, through striving kind of for the heights, striving for Olympus, you could have greater and greater forms of life and of mankind expressed through great men and through great cultures. And through doing this over and over again, you can kind of surpass man and create something new altogether, which is kind of a much more evolutionary view of progress. That there are going to be all these different kind of experiments, and each great man is a kind of experiment in overcoming man. And ultimately a lot of them will die off, but as you do this over and over again, kind of like mutations in a species, you eventually overcome the previous state which the species was in.
Yeah, I like that view, because at the end of the day, I see myself too as a progressive, and I think a lot of people make this false dichotomy where they believe that to be quote unquote right wing is to believe in unchangeability or immutability or something weird and gross like that, right? Which is sclerotic fundamentally. And or the opposite, which is a constant becoming downward, right? Constant leveling of man, a constant, everyone becomes increasingly interchangeable.
Right, the left.
Everyone it becomes exactly. And I think that's the fundamental breakdown why I don't consider myself a conservative, nor do I consider myself, in America you call it progressive liberal, but it's just basically a communist. And the reason why is because when they aim down, or they simply aim to still be, I just aim towards the sun like Icarus. And I find myself really happy because though we make allusions to this called, New Rome, and of course, people such as ourselves, we hearken back to places and eras of time where the aesthetic and the fullness of life was fleshed out that can offer us maybe a waypoint. I think what delineates us from them is that you, me, Pat, the Ark, we don't feel, I guess, enslaved by these times. We are not trying to like redo these times. What we're trying to do is be re-inspired by them and incorporate elements of them into our time in a new synthesis of our own.
Yes.
And that is incredibly, life affirming because of the fact that we're trying to synthesize and create our own syntheses and add in elements which are idiosyncratic ourselves, so completely original, that we bring to the table witting or unwittingly. And so, I guess it begs the question, Ark, what's your favorite time in history? Rome aside, because I feel like that's just too easy. You got to tell me, what is your favorite?
Well, you really screwing with me there by taking Rome away. I'd say it's hard to say, but it would probably have to be ancient Greece and the world of Homer, if that world truly ever existed. Yes.
So Homeric Greece.
Yes.
Oh, hell yeah.
I didn't go through all that trouble of learning ancient Greek and now forgetting it by now. But
speak to us. Tell us some ancient Greek. Come on, something off the rip.
Andra moyene pemusa.
Oh shit, dude!
What does that
mean?
That's the opening lines of the Odyssey.
Oh, base.
Oh shit! What does that mean? What does it mean? Like, is it like, I forget what it was. It's like, oh, muse or something like that.
It's just muse. Tell me of the fate of a man.
Oh shit, dude, that's beautiful. I was listening to archaic. I don't know if you call it archaic, but it's, I guess, old Greek, ancient Greek, and it is beautiful. And I think the most interesting thing when you look at languages is that languages tend to have either a martial or overtly quote unquote masculine affect, right, in their tonality and the way that their grammar is structured, and vice versa. There are languages which are more feminine and aesthetic and geared for a different focus of your mind, right? And I was just thinking about that myself, in German being the most probably warlike language out there. Yeah, it's guttural, but it's also very concise.
Yeah.
And then I'm fluent in the Romance languages in Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and that seems very not concise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot more sing-songy. But I think this ancient Greek, if you listen to it, it's almost like it's able to do both at the same time. Like, for instance, the terminology for undying fame, kleos optiton, right? I mean, that sounds at the same time both beautiful and like martial, if that makes sense. I mean, what do you guys read on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I totally get what you're saying. It's like when you're speaking German, for example. I mean, this is why I think Nietzsche says he prefers to write in French or something like that, or he prefers the French language to German. But yeah, French is more of a soft language, right? Where you're saying like, ancient Greek has that, that combination, that warlike tenacity, but also that softness, that sort of that ability to write poetry. And I actually think Japanese does this too, to a great extent. You see someone giving a speech in Japanese before they do their final banzai charge, and you're like, holy fuck, I'm ready to die for the emperor. But on the flip side, like if you ever heard a woman speak Japanese, it's very soft and feminine, or even Japanese poetry.
That's true.
So I think there are a few different ones like that, and I think ultimately it's when a people finds that balance of elegance and brutality, like Mishima talks about, and I do think there are a lot of examples of this, throughout the world. I think to an extent Latin as well. Maybe it's like Latin as spoken by the Romans perhaps was a little bit more warlike, but I also feel like in a lot of ways that kind of has that fusion. But yeah, no, I get what you mean. For sure.
Yeah, and I think, like, aesthetically speaking, the English language, especially as it's kind of infected by the American dialect, is probably the ugliest and most tacky language out there. I'll be honest with you. The only thing going for it is that it does do good, like martial commands, I'm sure you know, and it does sound good if you're like being aggressive, but it's very, very not I don't know, aesthetically pleasing, I guess, in my estimation. But I don't want to drag it on too far. But I do agree with you, man. I think maybe a language comes into its totality when you're able to balance the two. Maybe that's a marker of a healthy culture, being able to do both. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't know.
No, I agree.
But yeah. So I mean, Ark. All right, tell us this. So when is it, like, what's your origin story? Because for me, when you're raised in this era, I think the default is always being, I suppose, I don't know, liberal, whatever, the usual programming. How is it that you came by our way? What was the kind of like a come to Jesus moment, so to speak,
Come to Zeus moment.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I would say, in some ways it was always inborn, from a child. I was always attracted to heroism, whether it was in Disney movies, knights. I had books on knights and pirates and the ancient Greeks, and I had a closet just filled with swords. I would collect swords. I must have had like 100 different plastic and wooden swords. And so, yeah, I was always attracted to the heroic ideal and to, classical culture, and also to nature as well. I was lucky enough to go to a school where we spent a lot of time in nature. It was on a farm, and, we do camping trips and stuff like that. We get to milk cows. And that school also, they still practiced kind of Christian Germanic rituals, basically, like the maypole, or the slaying of the dragon, St. Michael slaying the dragon. So I was very much exposed to nature and to, the various heroic cultures, the mythology of the Norse and the Greeks and so on. So I was attracted to that stuff at a young age, and it was also ingrained in me, and I had the privilege to be around a lot of it. But, politically as a teenager, I was just kind of default liberal, because that's what most of the people around me were, default left. But I had this kind of Kaczynskian worldview. Like, I remember when I used to drive to school in the mornings, I'd look out the window and I just imagine, like, as the car drove, I'd imagine like the highway and all the buildings being like ripped up behind the car.
Oh, sick.
Just leaving like nature.
Dude, that's actually a beautiful vision. I like that. Keep going.
Yeah.
Let him cook. Go.
But yeah, so I had a very Kaczynskian kind of worldview of, like anti-civilization. Civilization has corrupted us. And yeah, when I got exposed to like The Walking Dead and post-apocalyptic literature, I was like, this is sick. This is what we need. And I had a whole phase where I was like, the apocalypse is coming. Like, I'm so ready for it. We're going to return to tribal living. It's going to be survival of the fittest. So even though I was, default liberal, I think my views underneath were always a bit questionable. Into the liberal paradigm.
You weren't having a normal one even back then.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, then I was exposed to kind of wokeism. It started to creep into my school in high school. Um, so then I was, I encountered Jordan Peterson and started reading Carl Jung. So I kind of went the other direction, full civilization supporter against degeneracy and decadence and the devouring mother of nature. But that never quite sat right with my soul. And eventually I came from Jung and Peterson to Nietzsche. And I was like, this is where it's at. This guy knows what's up. And yeah, that's basically how I got to where I was today. And then after that in college, I studied the classics, which obviously intersects beautifully with Nietzsche.
That's actually kind of quite a journey, honestly. And to be frank with you, I think it's probably the most interesting one because most people can't possibly conceptualize coming all the way from the left and being, supra right wing or something like that. And I guess it begs the question. Actually, I never asked Pat, what was your kind of journey like? I forgot.
Yeah, it was weird because I was halfway a certain painter enjoyer, halfway liberal. I was just being an edgy teenager, but like I was officially liberal. Like I thought I was liberal. I would do all like the gay rights, abortion shit, and then meanwhile I was watching videos of a certain painter. Like this guy's cool. And I was like, literally, this is the funniest thing ever. I literally would watch.
You were schizo posting.
Exactly. I would watch those things and I was like, if only he was nice to gay people, then he'd be perfect. um, so I had a really weird journey going into high school. So I used to play this one game. It was like Hearts of Iron 4, but like not as good. I forget what it was called. I think it was called like Making History. It was the same thing, but it was like turn based instead of like live timer. But I'd do that. I'd listen to certain songs while playing that game as a certain country. And it was all just being edgy, It was nothing substantive. Yeah. But from edginess, you start to expose yourself to certain things. I was part of all those conspiracy theories in high school. Everyone knew me as that guy who was like super... Like, it was weird because I still called myself like a Democrat, but I was also talking about, crazy shit. And then I had my cringe libertarian phase, which a lot of people go through. And then eventually I calmed down with the edginess and I found substance through Nietzsche, actually, just like the art. I threw the edginess to the side. I still enjoy watching that stuff just for the fun of it, but obviously, that was just a phase. But yeah, no, I was always a little bit crazy.
Interesting. I like that. It's actually a good story. I like that. Hell yeah. All right. No, that's cool. I mean, I always like canvassing people's opinions, and I guess I have this special opportunity to ask some big guys, top guys, a platoon of Panzer kind guys, who how they exactly came here. But it seems as though most people I speak to never really have an orthodox way of arriving where you and I have arrived at. It's always very idiosyncratic and different, and I think that's incredibly vital. I mean, it's incredibly inspiring to me because there's no template, and I think that really freaks out the enemy in a lot of ways because they don't know how to preempt it. There's no pattern. It's just kind of schizo, which is kind of cool. And I mean, for instance, I guess for myself, yeah, like I guess I was raised as like like a liberal, I guess, and whatever. But then I also came from a military family. I enjoyed military stuff, but the ethos, for instance, of command and control, of hierarchy, which presupposes excellence, obedience, command, being able to discipline men below you. Even just, for instance, affirming the fact there are men below you and above you. That is a revolutionary concept for most liberals, and I think. Or at least it's something that really makes them cringe, quote unquote. But I also encountered the History Channel, and I really loved all the old war movies. I liked Zulu. I'd watch that over and over again, and Saving Private Ryan. And I think it came to it was a lifelong crescendo of me because you're raised, yes, you're in a military family, and in a military setting, those values are acceptable. But for them, a lot of my ancestors are kind of normies. And so what that means for them is effectively, um, I don't know, when you're in civilian life, you serve the people, and the people are all equal, and all this kind of gay shit. And it's just like, okay, I don't believe that, like, at all. Like, that's kind of dumb. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
At the end of the day, like, there's no reason why it means anything. And I don't know, you meet a lot of people who are leftists in general, and I think they're fundamentally uninspiring, especially because you know I'm closely related to a lot of, like, I guess, interesting high ranking liberal people, and if you met them in person and you held a mirror to their face, they would be uninspired as well, which is, I guess, why they have to tear everything down beautiful in the world. But I guess that's the difference between me and them, is that I can see someone better than myself and not feel like I have to cut their heels down. I
Right.
feel like, wow, that's beautiful, but I'm still going to compete and try to see if I can be king of the hill too. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Right.
It's an interesting thing, but I kind of want to hand off the mic to you, Pat. Tell me. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, no, no, about what?
No, so tell me, like, as far as, so we're talking about New Rome,
Yeah.
and I was just thinking to myself, like, with the Ark, um, I think the dichotomy of our time, or the crux of our time, is that left and right, quote unquote, both
Hmm.
share an axiom. And I think the way you overcome that, the great overcoming, is really just setting a new synthesis, a new understanding, a new self understanding.
Yes.
And for instance, concepts such as left and right is feeding into a frame presupposed by people we ostensibly oppose, quote unquote.
Hmm.
But I've realized that philosophically, or even in war, the best way to destroy your enemy is by the oblique. And for instance, when you talk about equality versus hierarchy, right wingers make this really stupid claim about hierarchy. They shouldn't be talking about that. The way you frame it is excellence versus mediocrity,
Mm.
because excellence already presupposes a stratification of skill or beauty or intensity of will. But I just wanted your guys' perspective on that. Like, how have you engaged with that previously, and how do you seek to overcome it yourself? And I wanted to throw it to the Ark first, and then Pat.
Yeah, I think the kind of excellence versus mediocrity, or even excellence versus equality frame, is extremely helpful, and it seems to be the kind of red pill for a lot of people to get into Nietzsche and this sort of stuff. I remember watching a video from Uberboyo a long time ago.
Hey.
Yeah, we all enjoy Steph's videos. Shout out to Steph.
Yeah. And he talked about Nietzsche and veganism. And he talked about how Sam Harris had become a vegan because Sam's belief, of course, is that we should try to eliminate as much suffering in the world as possible to create as much comfort, essentially, as possible.
Cringe.
So, so why not become a vegan then, right? Why
Right.
suffering on poor animals? But then he stopped, and he said, yeah, he just didn't feel as vital, right? He didn't feel as healthy, he didn't have as much energy, and that reveals that implicitly, Sam does value vitality, energy, health. Implicitly, he does value quality of life over not inflicting harm,
Mm-hmm.
because implicitly he's making the decision, I'm actually going to kill, murder animals. He's not going to do it himself, but somewhere an animal's having its throat slit, so I can feel energized, so I can have a higher quality of life, even though I could just take the hit, have less energy, walk around being sleepy and anemic, and save the animals suffering.
Yeah.
So these very kind of simple frames like that, where the again, excellence, it all comes back to this excellence versus equality, or quality versus equality, or excellence versus mediocrity, are very important issues, and they're very red pilling issues for people. Just when you point out what do you want out of life? What makes life worth living? Is it quality? Is it vitality? Because if so, then you're gonna have to make a sacrifice on the front of equality,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because quality can only come kind of through struggle, through hierarchy, through competition.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it's interesting, like ideas of like pity, for like suffering. I think that is in fact a subversion. I forget if Lance and I talked about this yesterday, but like pity in and of itself is a subversion of the instinct to, for example, like a parental instinct. As a parent, you're not pitying your children. You just have a duty to raise them, and you enjoy doing it. And leadership is very similar. It's sort of this paternal instinct, right? You're not helping out them because, oh, poor little guy, you're doing it because by strengthening your platoon as a whole is stronger, and you will accomplish the mission. So pity is a subversion of this, and it comes from something that has a function to something that is sort of degrading to your overall life quality. That's just a quick thing I want to say. And then going back to what you were mentioning with Sam Harris, he's actually, I don't know if you guys knew, but he's actually esoteric vegan crypto fascist maxing right now. He's just playing the long game.
What? No way.
He's playing the long game. He's actually on our side. He's just trying to make them look stupider. Anyway, all jokes aside.
Check.
Yeah.
Okay.
All jokes aside, it's interesting because life from an evolutionary standpoint, starting as, and Lance and I did talk about this yesterday, starting as a single amoeba, like a single, from the Big Bang, this very, base living organism, right? Branching out to like plants, animals, even humans later on. It sort of blurs the distinction of like any sort of inherent value of life. It's like life's value comes from its functions. The more you function, the more your value becomes. The more self-awareness that you have, the more cognitive ability that you have, the more you can shape the world around you. And I bring this up because I made a video last week. It was called like Nature is War. And I was trying to distinguish Hobbes and Rousseau, and how Rousseau has this very naive worldview about how man is in the state of nature. He says man is peaceful, and I say no. Like Hobbes says, man is very violent. And I had this comment where this person said, no, nature is not about war. Nature is just trying to heal. Nature doesn't go to war when it heals. And I'm like, you realize, I mean, even if, all right, take all this, like, let's say animals weren't killing each other, right? For some crazy reason, you're still killing plants. Like, if life all comes from the same root, how come it's not war when the buffalo chews on that grass, that poor grass? It's like, no, please, buffalo, don't eat me. I'm just an innocent piece of grass. But, I guess what I'm trying to say is life is always war. Animals are killing each other. Predators are killing, prey, because there's no doggy kibble for lions and wolves. They're like, I learned that as a young kid when I had a pet snake and I had to feed him live mice. I like cried the first time. Okay, I'm a pussy, I get it. But it taught me, like, this is how nature is. You have these little baby animals are getting eaten alive, and that's just how it is. It's not a sad thing. It's just nature. So leftism and people like Sam Harris and the like, and progressivism, it's all about looking at life from an anti-natural point of view. It's all about looking at life as if, with abundance, without property, without all these distinctions, we can all get along. But there will always be some element of inequality. I think Costin in Selective Breeding talks about sexual inequality. How do you solve sexual inequality in a communist society? There's always going to be that. You're going to like give somebody a state-issued wife? It's kind of like what Christianity attempts to do with monogamy, and it's somewhat successful, right? It's somewhat successful, and it was somewhat successful for a long time with the nuclear family. But of course, there's a lot of issues with that too. It's like you can't really solve sexual inequality no matter what. So there will always be something, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Below that, there's so many other things that would go wrong in this anti-natural point of view. But all that to say is, I agree with everything you guys are saying. Excellence versus mediocrity, or excellence versus a lack of excellence, is, more simply put, I think, living with a correct view of nature and living with a naive, incorrect view of nature. And this is what I think conservatives get wrong as well. And as much as I enjoy reading Evola, what Evola gets wrong is by seeing hierarchy as this sort of metaphysical thing. And the issue I have with that is, a king, if he is not a good warrior, there's no spirit that's helping him stay in power. He's going to get conquered. These steppe tribesmen are going to come sweeping down and burn his villages and kill him and steal his wives and daughters like Genghis Khan would. Like, ultimately, It is your excellence that keeps you in power. There is no sort of metaphysical backing keeping you there. You create the metaphysics. You earn your right to ascend to godhood like Caesar did, or like Romulus did, or like Aeneas did, or like Augustus did. You create the metaphysics. You influence the realm of the gods, and that's something where Evola does get it right when he talks about the Roman conception of victory and believing they have control over fate. But I think a problem with Evola and a lot of these conservatives that don't like the word revolution, it's like you said, Lance, it's like they're trying to hold on to something in the past that is limiting to them. And I think ultimately you have to see life as a sort of battlefield. You have to see life as war. And it is something where there's nothing protecting you. The only thing protecting you is your own excellence and the excellence of your friends and your family and those that are part of your collective identity. It's like Ernst Jünger says, when a platoon of men marches forward, with steel helmets and gray uniforms, they are one body. Your friend to the right of you gets shot in the shoulder. You feel the pain in your shoulder. That's because you and other people building up their excellence must work together to accomplish the mission. So all that to say,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
be vital, Anon. Be vital.
Yeah, I mean, like I think people mistake why my mission set, my statement about the martial life is so unidynamically, in their view, military. And I always make the assertion that it's only the foundation, right? Everything can come from that. Hell, Plato himself and Socrates, Achilles, all these men prided themselves on their military virtue first. They were always defining themselves by that, so much so that during the Peloponnesian War, Socrates himself was first making his name known because of his excellence of valor in the battlefield. Jünger, same thing. So many people come from the battlefield, and it's not because the battlefield itself, war itself, is this other thing out there. It's because war is a constant state that penetrates all aspects and all times of our lives. It just comes in more subtle or more familiar forms, right? So war is probably the utmost crescendo crystallization of violence between wills to win, right? That's a fight. But we are constantly being exposed to that circumstance. Hell, think about the law. Think about, in America, the adversarial or agonal principle of our law. If you have a really great lawyer, you're going to get off the charges, right? And that's just a matter of the fact that you hired someone that was really good at manipulating the words of others and the perceptions of others, right? And then, of course, we remediate and step it back. The people who are the subjugates of others are because they lack that power. They lack the ability to either express themselves or to bring their nature. Maybe they weren't made of really good stuff. Maybe it was the case that generation after generation, they're just the mass, the bricks at the base of the pyramid. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Their entire life is just about supporting that perfect capstone, bronze capstone at the pyramid of life, and that's their role, and that's beautiful too. But I think what I'm trying to say, Ark, is how crazy are our schizo posts? What do you think? Is it vital enough?
I think. I wanted to on the topic of the kind of basis of reality and the cruelty of nature. Mm-hmm. I wanted to bring up Greek tragedy. Because Greek tragedy, and coming back to the topic of pity as well, was in a certain way, you could say, an exercise in pity, where you come together to see this terrible thing happen to this hero, right? Whether he's torn apart physically or his eyes are stabbed out, you go in there and you experience this terrible tragedy, this terrible cruelty. And it's sort of a way of reacquainting yourself with, you could say, base reality, right? Because, in the case of Sam Harris, you see someone who has drifted so far from nature that he doesn't understand how absurd his principles are. And I think in a certain way, you could view Christ in the same light, right? Contemplating the crucifixion of Christ, right? The destruction of the Lamb could also serve as a reacquaintance with, the fundamental truth about reality. And the thing is, though, in the Greek tradition, it is, one's heroism is kind of directly proportionate to the tragedy which they experience. So, the kind of thesis there is that the more you engage with life, right, the more cruel and tragic it is. And you do have the option to stay at home, to not go to Troy and to live to be old, to live a peaceful life. But in doing so, you engage less with life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very Nietzschean thesis in there.
Yeah, and Lance and I were actually talking about that recently. I brought up the old adage, like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's so simple, but there's like, it's true. Life is not this fairy tale happy ending. If you look at a lot of our heroes, like all three of us, and I like I said, I mentioned this one of my conversations with Lance recently. A lot of them died in really brutal, terrible ways. Julius Caesar was assassinated in the Senate. Alexander died before he could, truly maximize his potential. Romulus dies in battle. Mishima, as to purify his soul, Mishima commits ritual suicide. A lot of these people that we consider our heroes die in completely brutal ways, but in that tragic death, there is beauty because it resembles life. Life is tragic. And I think, a lot of us probably have this sort of vision and fantasy, dying in the heat of battle. That's kind of like, I think, a man in touch with his spirit ultimately wants that, It's like, I forget, Bap has, I think it was like from Caribbean Rhythms, but like Bap said something like, he's talking about how he thinks true love exists, but he thinks that it's brief and ends in tragedy. He's talking about like Romeo and Juliet, for example, and he's like, most love stories that last forever end up as like the topic of comedy. And I'm not sure I agree with that, but then he says at the end, he's like, I want death, and it's like, there's this kind of, so it's interesting. It's like a lot of us have this will to like die triumphantly in battle, and it's because all our heroes died young. Even Caesar probably could have lived a good amount longer if he was like 55, something like that, but he still could have done a lot in his life. It's like a lot of these guys die at the height of their glory, die at the height of their beauty, so to speak. And it's I don't know. What do you guys think?
I agree with you, and I think the Ark had this really great video that we're going to link below, but it had to do with the tragic view of life. And since we have the horse here, let's hear it from the horse's mouth. Like, can you explain to us again just the spark notes of it, because it was so good. I remember watching it, I was like, damn, this guy, holy shit. Go ahead.
I don't know actually exactly which video you're referring to.
No, but it was like the one where you were talking about the pagan versus Christian ethos of life. And also I think it was a separate one. I think it's maybe a multifarious theme that you pick up on multiple times, but it just talks about the element of tragedy and imbibing it in the worldview where, life is overcome because of the very fact that there are peaks and troughs, the Promethean myth. It was the Promethean video. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it links to what we were talking to earlier, that you don't judge a life necessarily by the ending, but by the peaks, right? By the greatness achieved, not necessarily whether they, died happy with warm socks on, tucked into bed. And personally, I've always found the idea, people say, oh, I want to die in bed. I've always found that pretty repulsive. I would at least, want to die in a field, under a tree or something, not in my bed. But I was going to link also the tragedy thing back to what you were saying about, military virtue in war, is in the same way that we've lost connection in the modern West with nature and with just the fundamental way in which reality works. The basis of civilization really is the military, as you were saying, military organization, And if a civilization stops having a military, then the civilization really ceases to exist, as we saw with Rome, right? Rome ultimately fell when they could no longer muster a military defense of their own borders. And so, in the same way, we've lost acquaintance with the violence of nature. When a society, when the individual stops having any contact with the martial, especially the young men, you have basically the same issue. And I think that's why a lot of young men, of course, are attracted to martial arts and the gym. They're instinctually seeking out these kind of martial practices. But that alone is not necessarily enough when you've really lost touch with what the very foundation of civilization is. And most people don't even think like, what would happen if we didn't have an army? Well, we'd probably be conquered, because people don't even think that, they don't even think that could be a possibility. They don't even know that there are people who would want to conquer.
Yeah, like, oh, my human rights will protect me. My human rights, I'll be fine. It's like, well, where do you think your human rights come from, you idiot? So yeah, it's like 100%.
No, it's truly that. And I mean, you're seeing that now with the Constitution. People think that voting harder or appealing to your rights more is going to somehow sway an angry mob or a house invader from your home.
That's illegal. Stop.
Yeah, exactly. And I think really what New Rome is, more than anything, is really just a reacquaintance of pain and the centrality of nature in our lives, because nature is at once fecund and fucking great and beautiful and nurturing and all that good stuff, but it's also a brutal bitch, cunning and cutthroat and unforgiving. And so should that be the template of our city, of our virtue, of our ethos, to help our friends and destroy our enemies, to do so with utmost succor and at the same time ruthlessness. And so to re-imbibe, Nietzsche talks about this great metaphor, right? For a great tree to grow strong and profound, it must grow up towards the sky through its branches only when it can reach down further into the earth, into hell with its roots. And I think that is really what New Rome is about. It's reacquainting both paths and synthesizing into a totality. Because Romans, we always talk about the Romans, but what people don't like, I mean, we would say what you want about Andrew Tate or whatever, and they're talking about sex trafficking. I was like, well, dude, you're a fan of the Romans. They literally enslaved millions of people and put them in brothels, boys and girls, and you admire them. And that was part of what made Rome great. In addition to everything else, I mean, to take for an account, do you think the BLM riots would ever happen? No, dude. Pompey took Spartacus and his rebellion, and he made mile markers out of people that were crucified. And, like, at the end of the day, obviously there's the opposite. There was high art. There was high engineering ability. There was, X, Y, and Z. And fundamentally, Nietzsche unravels the riddle where I think a lot of communists and socialists, and Nietzsche derides these people, they want to have their cake and eat it too, right? They think that they're able to take the good from Rome and then discard the bad, when they don't understand that it was very much the excesses that they see, the negative excesses of Rome, which were part and parcel of how they became great. Especially with the Romans' attitude towards slavery and the slave, and why they were able to be so brutal to them, because they were able to be just as ruthless as nature was. And their reasoning for people who were slaves to be mistreated was because they allowed themselves to be so. And they could always choose suicide, and many high Romans did. For instance, Cato the Elder, we spoke about this in our last podcast. And to be just as brutal and ruthless to ourselves and in seeking our own excellence as others are to their enemies, and so on. And I know this sounds like, I guess some like really kind of gore stuff, but I'm not trying to do that. I think it's something that we probably have to overcorrect for, because our time has swayed into such effete, weird effeminacies that we have to like overcompensate that way, so that way we get the whole circle again. I don't know. Maybe you guys can counter signaling me, but how do you feel about that?
If I could just, yeah, I think, when you talk about the two parts, elegance and brutality, right? That's essentially
Yeah.
what we're describing, right? You can't have the good without the bad, bad without the good. I think it was in the Gay Science that Nietzsche says something along the lines of, it's like the evil instinct of men is actually one of those very instincts that propels us forward, right? But having said that, we do live in a different time, and you do have to account for that. I don't think we're going to be able to, enslave millions of Germanics and Celtic concubines anytime soon. As much as I'd love to, it's probably not going to happen. So you do have to adapt with the times, and I think you adapt with the times by being ruthless, not cruel. So that'll be
Correct.
yeah. Like you should be ruthless. Like if you deal with opposition from your enemies, you have to fight tooth and nail without any limitation. But I think cruelty, in a sense, can also be a weakness. So for example, when dealing with the peasants, we've talked about this before in our first time we ever talked, Lance. It's like you have to treat the peasant with respect, and he will treat you with respect. It's a paternal thing. You don't abuse your children.
Yep.
You are hard with them, and you have to be firm with them, and you're going to push them. You're going to be strict, but you're not going to be cruel, right? So cruelty can be a weakness too, because it kind of is a sadistic, like, oh, I want to inflict pain on others. When you inflict pain
Right.
on others, you should do so out of necessity rather than, out of some...
Constructive cruelty is what I'm really trying to aim for. And
Yeah.
I'm glad that you definitely pulled the reins on that, because I don't want people misconstruing what I'm trying to say. It's always in the aim of constructing something better.
Right.
And we've really skewed too far over into, what is it, pain aversion?
Mhm.
And it comes at the cost of greater life. But you're absolutely correct. Cruelty and abuse for its own sake are not healthy, and it's fundamentally, it causes people to resent you, and it also makes you, frankly, not such a great person. It doesn't make you beautiful. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe Ark has a more nuanced take than I do.
Well, yeah, I mean, Nietzsche talks about how civilization is kind of inherently parasitic, right? It's built upon inequality. And I think a few things to consider would, one, be that when people look back at ancient societies, yes, there was a lot of cruelty there, but have we really eliminated it? Because it's obviously still present in our societies in various ways. If you look at the iPhone, they say, is made with slave labor, the batteries that are in it or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, in many ways, we're just kind of outsourcing our cruelty and concealing our cruelty, like with factory farming, for example, is far more cruel than animal sacrifice, but it's hidden. So, we don't think about that. A lot of
Yes.
Christians will say, oh, it was so barbaric. They used to sacrifice animals, right?
Let
So
me
in a
try
lot
my
of ways,
burger.
in a lot of ways, we just conceal our violence. But then another element of it is as well, I think, if you look to longevity, a society which is, built upon a large slave population or anything like that, seems to generally collapse very quickly. Right. Because, yeah, I mean, just look at what happened with Rome, is they, quickly had more slaves than they did Romans. And therefore, I think that's probably the main cause of their collapse, if you could point to one, or, the most influential factor. And with the idea of the heroic ideal, right, heroism, chivalry, I think what's beautiful about that is it seeks to apply rules to the game of the will to power, right, which are understood as social rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not an understanding of the world as moral, but it seeks to impose rules kind of on warfare, right? Like the idea of honor.
It circumscribes the violence, so it's not chaos, but actually gives rise to excellence. Kind of like the Greek agon, whatever gymnasia you may go to, or the rules of poetry. It's always competition done in good faith within certain limitations to make sure that the playing ground is equal, so to speak, and so that man was judged on his ability and not necessarily on bad practice or whatever it may be. Is
Exactly.
that what you'd get at?
Yeah, exactly. And it's, yeah, it's kind of a more successful strategy in the long term, right? Because um, for a society, you don't want a huge peasant population who really hates you because they're going to destroy you, right? Look at Sparta's issues with
Hmm.
their helots constantly revolting and having trouble with that. But it's also a better strategy just on the individual level, um, because it does add a stabilizing factor to society. So society isn't just all out war of all against all. Um, and what's interesting is you can actually see it in nature. You can see rudimentary forms of, I guess, what we would call pagan morality in nature, which is that we see animals naturally fall into the system of tit for tat cooperation and reciprocal altruism,
Hmm.
which is, when you encounter, and this happens all the way down to the level, I think, of microorganisms, which is very fascinating. So things that don't even have consciousness is when you encounter another organism, initially you come in willing to cooperate, and if they cooperate with you, you keep cooperating with them. Um, but if they don't cooperate with you, then you stop cooperating.
Hmm.
And this is basically the very rudimentary version of the be kind to your enemies, to
Yeah.
your friends, sorry, and not to your enemies. um and we can see that biologically that's the best form of cooperation, is this kind of system based on honor, loyalty. If someone does something good for you, right, you do it back to them, you're loyal to them. If someone wrongs you, then you act hostile towards them as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's interesting, and I'd like to see those studies because it's not that I disbelieve you; it's that I want others to read uh, these studies because it's based in fact, right? Check your facts, right? It's not just things that we're contriving out of midair and synthesizing or making up wholesale on our own, right? These things are from observations of nature, fidelity to reality, and understanding the beauty of reality. And so you see this with war and everything else, but things that are completely contrived usually lead us astray from what is quote unquote the good. And this is probably my biggest annoyance, maybe, with what the Socratics did, right? Which is to cleave physical reality from the arbitrary reality, right? From the actual reality. And then of course you get Platonism,
Hmm.
Christianity, communism, etc. And which is why they're able to make these perfect palaces in the sky, which are in reality not perfect at all, right? They're not perfect in any sense. However, what the ideal is that basically they're able to make hallucinations. They're able to form pneumoi, right? Instead of be true to physis, and make a uh, snake oil that ultimately kills billions of people. And what's worse than killing millions of people is that it ends up doing something worse. It mangles people. And if 2,000 years of Christianity isn't enough to show how much less we have become comparatively, then let us look at, today at the modern communists and what they're portraying the perfect body to be. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, maybe I go too far, and maybe that would be also a good point to leave it off. What do you think, Pat? Excuse me.
Oh, my Spider-Man now? No, I was kidding.
Yeah, I know. Seriously.
Yeah, no. I mean, I do think there needs to be, like, we always talk about left and right lateral limits for these sort of things, and of course, observing nature is what dictates that. But I mean, I've always felt that the true morality and what sort of balances and synthesizes might makes right, and what, because, like, obviously they're very nihilistic wills to power, like the slaves will to power, like the merchants will to power, right? It's like we said in the beginning of this video, why are these elites disgusting to us? If you just seek power, that's not the full affirmation of life. And I think beauty is always what balances the morality of power. You cannot seek power in an ugly way. You must seek power beautifully. And I think, maybe that sounds very broad, but I think in a lot of ways, you look at actions like we go back to cruelty, for example. When cruelty seems ugly, And it's, for example, if you were a warrior and you wanted to test yourself in battle, and you wanted to raise your reputation, you wouldn't just find a tribe of cripples and massacre them. It's like, you come back and you're like, I just massacred a bunch of cripples. It's like, okay, so, or I slaughtered a bunch of cows. I went to a field and I just started shooting cows. Like, no one's going to think that's cool. And I think beauty ties into that, because great accomplishment, like risking yourself, is where beauty comes from. It's like, and cruelty even, it's like, cruelty is almost a cope for not being able to take what is above you. It's like Nietzsche always says, seek the high. I think it's an ecce homo, maybe. He always says, seek the highest opponent. That's why he combated Christianity. He famously says he never had a bad experience with Christians. All the Christian friends he had were very nice, very amicable. He sought the strongest opponent because he felt that was the strongest opponent that he could target. And I think similarly, beauty comes from that. It comes from taking the strongest opponent, attacking the most vicious enemy. It doesn't come from, like, if you're playing pickup basketball, as I know we all have gone past Jordan Peterson a long time ago, but I did see one of his talks once, and he still once in a while has a gem, amongst all the coal. But
he does have gems, and I feel it's like, I read his 12 rules of life and I thought they were good, actually, to be frank. And he didn't tell you the 13th rule of life is to just do a shit ton of mescaline. But anyway, go ahead.
Last time, Lance, you said the 13th rule of life was like banging Michaela. So I don't know. But last time we talked, that's what you said. So I don't like this inconsistency. No, but
no, I wasn't ready.
In all seriousness, though, the reason I bring that up is during his talk, he talks about playing pickup basketball. He's like, you as an adult are not going to play pickup basketball against a 10-year-old. Of course you're going to win. But who the fuck cares? Oh, I beat someone. You seek somebody who is either close to your level or above your level, because that's beauty. Beauty comes from defeating what is strong. And I think chivalry, and of course this can become a subversion over time. Morality can become a subversion, but taking morality as a consequentialist rather than as dogma or as a categorical imperative. If you take morality as like just observation of nature, if morality could be something as simple as I'm going to throw a spear a certain way, because then I know if I just throw it all stupid, you can apply moral relativism to action, I guess. If I just throw a spear however the fuck I want, it's not going to hit the target. I have to throw it a specific way. The same way you understand, parenting. Okay, maybe I shouldn't, beat my kid until he's bloody, just punch him all the time. Like, maybe this isn't the best solution, right? It's not like you're being a pussy. It's not like you're being weak and decadent. It's like, no, you're observing what works and what doesn't work. So all that to say, and in terms of New Rome, and I think this is the reason why you need religion ultimately. A lot of people call our sphere secular because we're not these traditional Christians, and I don't even oppose any religion as the name. I oppose certain doctrines from those religions. So I always want to put a positive vision, but we do need a religion and a new religion, I think, because you do need those left and right lateral limits. You do need a doctrine that can build you up, because ultimately there are only so many great people in history. Most people don't grow up to be great people. So for your soldiers, right, the builders, if you are the architect, you need them to have some rules to follow so that they can be at the quality you need to complete the mission, to complete the vision, and to build the castle. So I think even Nietzsche says, he kind of alludes to this when he talks about Christianity during the medieval period. He said, well, Christianity, specifically the Catholic Church, let's is it redirected the ressentiment inward. So instead of like hating the master, these people hated themselves because they're trying to live an ascetic life. And obviously, that's not like he's saying this is a good thing, but he's saying, hey, this kind of helped to a certain extent, right? So I guess what I'm getting at is you do need some doctrine for the little man. It's not the little man's fault. He's never going to be great. Some people are just not going to be great, but they still fulfill a purpose, and you still need them. Too many chiefs, not enough Indians. So what I'm getting at is you do need something. You do need some morality, but it's like you can't let the morality constrain the great minds of your society. You can't let it constrain the higher caste, but you do need rules for people to follow if you're going to accomplish anything, right?
Check, for real.
That's what New Rome will be. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think heroism essentially is kind of beauty of action, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that what is it? Schopenhauer says, man can't be happy. He can be, however, heroic. And heroism doesn't have to be this pinnacle Achilles type attitude. Heroism happens even with the little man,
Hmm.
even with his, when it comes to, for instance, today's Father's Day in America, comes with our fathers, Some fathers are greater than others, but your father is your own. And he did a great thing by creating you. And so ultimately, there are aspects of heroism in every aspect and portion of life. It's just a matter of how much, how do you say, gravity or will or whatever it may be, synergy, that specific node of heroism has accumulated to itself that we draw ourselves like flies to a light. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I do agree with you that ultimately heroism is an action, just like, for instance, philosophy or religion is fundamentally an action. It is never just simply contemplation. Ideas must always give way to action. And that alone is the consummation of your beliefs. It's not enough to talk about it, just like we're talking about here, and it's all very well. I love the arc, I love Pat, but it's important that we act on our own. And
Yes.
this is part of the vision I have for you guys, for you who are listening out there, is to start doing the things that we preach, to start building each other and oneself up, to engage in good faith fraternal competition with one another without cutting each other's heels or falling into this kind of indifference to status, right? And also, I don't know if you guys had any last thoughts as far as you guys wanted to share before we sign off here.
I would say seek to make yourself beautiful in body, spirit, and in action, and strive always towards the higher and towards becoming Ubermensch, who will be born at the head of New Rome.
Kill? I
Based.
love that.
And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that's a good way to close it out. And like last thing I'll say is, obviously we allude to New Rome and we give little flashes of prophecy. I was telling Lance yesterday, Ark is we're saving up money to get a really hot woman to be the new Oracle at Delphi. We're gonna so we're working on that. So guys, just bear with us. We'll have to be your your Walmart oracles until then. We will read the entrails and try to be the best seers we can. But eventually, we will hire the hot oracle. But until then, all I have to say to you is, New Rome will be precisely the force which seeks to create beautiful people, and it seeks to give everybody a role in creating this beauty, from the very bottom of society, who must help build these spaceships, right, that are going to propel us to the stars, all the way up to the person who's actually drawing up the blueprints for these spaceships and doing the astrophysics and the engineering. Everybody has a role to play, and it's ultimately to propel humanity towards a final form. And maybe not a final form, maybe a constantly evolving form. But the Ubermensch is coming, and we together, all of us, all have a role in that, whether great or small. So prepare yourself for the coming of New Rome, because once it starts, it will engulf this universe like an unquenchable fire. And the He's What Haderach Ubermensch is coming. Anyway, that's all I gotta say. So, anything else from everybody, or shall I give the final sentence?
Strength and honor, Legionaries.
Yes, be heralds of the lightning, my friends.
Based. And as always, this is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the Warrior Philosophy. We'll see you next time.